Hello everybody, welcome to today's COSI seminar. We have Kate Tallman from the Technology Transfer Office, the CU Technology Transfer Office. She has been with the office since 2002. She's the Director of Technology, Transfer, specialized in working with the CU research groups that produce software technology. She has an MBA from the University of Colorado Leeds School of Business. That means
right here.
And she focused in her MBA on marketing. She has private sector experience, which includes performing market and financial analysis of healthcare companies. And more recently, she has experience being the director of marketing as well as the co-founder of Rolling Planet, a local venture-backed software company specialized in wireless LAN technology. So, welcome.
Thank you very much. And when I was in business school here, they would have never let us get away with nobody sitting right here in the middle where I'm talking to. But apparently, that's how this group works, huh? So I do expect you guys will jump in, even though I can only see you out of my peripheral vision. And I'm supposed to be looking at the camera because we're being videoed, so don't be offended when I don't make eye contact, I guess. Even though I can't see you, you should jump in and feel free to ask questions at any time. I have, the format is 45 minutes of discussion and then 15 minutes of question and answer, but I would be just as happy if people ask questions along the way. I think it's a really interesting topic, technology commercialization, and that's why I do what I do. But how many of you are actively working on technology research? or how many of you are supposed to be working on technology research? Should I put it that way? Okay. Or even if you are planning to someday, it's kind of it's interesting to think about the technologies you're working on. And when I talk to groups at the university, I'm usually talking to groups who are working on certain technologies, and then they are interested in knowing the difference between, well, when is this just my day-to-day research work, and when is this something that is an invention? And that's something that the person doing the research has to have a sense of, because I'm not physically in everybody's research lab looking over everyone's shoulder. So the difference between a good university technology transfer program and a great one is really the inventors and whether or not they know when to call us. That makes all the difference. So we're going to talk a little bit about inventions and some examples of inventions. I think examples are usually the most fun thing to talk about. Patents. Most inventions are going to be protected with a patent if they are protected, and so it's important to know some of the legal ins and outs of when you can get a patent. Our process here at the University of Colorado. Some discussion of innovation diffusion, meaning how do you actually get something out there. We do have handouts over here on the other side for everyone coming in late. And then startup company versus licensing the technology is always a question that people are interested in. How do you know when your technology is something that could form the basis of a startup company? And then we can talk about your questions. So one of our jobs at the CU Technology Transfer Office is looking at the output of federally funded research. And the federal government is often funding advanced cutting-edge technologies that they serve a need that the federal government has. So when NASA is funding things, it's serving a need for something that enables their space exploration. And that could be something that is completely unique to that situation, or it could be something that has broader applications. And we always have to think about what was this project originally funded for, and then what else could this technology possibly do? And so one of the classic examples, not from the University of Colorado, but just out there, is multi-junction photovoltaics, which were originally pushed by NASA as a way to get their satellites to live longer on photovoltaics that were lighter, because those were the important parameters. But NASA did figure out that although it may not be economical to put these pretty fancy photovoltaics on everybody's roof, it is pretty good idea to make solar concentrators out of them. And so you could find a way to apply technology that was designed for space and use it on Earth. So then the challenge becomes, how do you see that, and how do you identify what the most promising commercial application of a technology might be? I checked out your schedule, and that's finding the right problem. You have often a solution to a problem, but if it's a problem that NASA has or a problem that the military has, it may not be a problem that everybody has. So you have to say, okay, I have this solution. What is the problem that is most interesting for it? And this is a real art, and I can't tell you exactly how we do this, but in our office we make it our business to get to know a lot of people who are very interested in having those discussions. Sometimes it takes the form of brainstorming, where we will bring together the inventor and people from a couple of different industries to have kind of a roundtable discussion and say, okay, well, this has the following advantages. Why would you need that in your industry or not? And it's those kinds of discussions, not very scientific, but that's how we're able to narrow down the right application and the right problem for our technology. So it sounds like you had a speaker from CDM Optics just last time. So that's fortunate, because that's one of my favorite examples that did come from the University of Colorado. And now I don't have to explain what wavefront coating is, since you all heard the presentation last time. Can anybody explain it for me?
He didn't talk much about that.
He didn't? What did he talk about?
Cameras and
Wavefront coating is their technology that was developed originally in the electrical engineering department here at the university. They can be used to keep things in focus no matter what perspective they're in relative to each other. So usually when you're using a camera, you can focus on one point, and then you have to change some mechanical features to focus on the other point. And you can have one or the other in focus. And what this is basically a software algorithm that can make it so that you don't have to change mechanical parts around and lenses in order to have the entire depth of field focused. So one of the struggles that CDM Optics had when it was starting out was, okay, well, you can apply this to microscopes, you can apply this to cameras, you can apply this to looking more closely at barcodes, and the list went on and on and on. And so it became a real problem of, well, who needs this the most? And what is the biggest opportunity where we really need to make a difference with this technology? And it took them years before they hit on the camera phone application, because everybody wants to be able to take a picture with their cell phones now, and you don't have a focusing mechanism in that. You expect whatever you're pointing at to be in focus. That's the only way that a camera phone can work. And so that's why ultimately the small company was bought by a larger company in order to put that kind of technology into everybody's cell phone. So in that case, the university filed patents on wavefront coating technology. And so that brings the question, why would the university file patents on things at all? The university is actually the owner of any intellectual property that comes from the federally funded or other funded research that goes on in the labs. That doesn't make us owners of every idea that happen. In particular, students who are not paid to do their research, the university doesn't have ownership over their ideas. So it's only funded research programs when you're being paid to discover something. But what we'll find is that the goals for our investigators are to do research, make a discovery, and publish it, collect data and publish it. And once something is out there and published, sometimes industry will grab hold of it and will say, okay, I know how to use that. I know how to make my operations more efficient or make more money for myself with that. But sometimes they look at it and they say, well, I know how to capitalize on that opportunity, but if I do it, and if I put all my money into the development costs that are going to be necessary to bring that to market, my competitor will just see it and will just do it themselves. And so for certain technologies that are going to require a lot of investment to get to a commercial state, that's the whole purpose of having patents. Patents will grant the inventor a 20-year monopoly on their idea. After that, it goes into the public domain for all to use. But during that 20 years, the idea is that is your time to have exclusive control that can give you the payoff and keep your competitors out while you get the return on your investment. You know, the classic example is all of the money that needs to go into new therapeutic drugs. You have to test it in animals, and then you have to test it on very sick people who have no other recourse, and then you have to test it on a broader population. And these tests cost hundreds of millions of dollars. And so there's just no way that anybody could justify doing that and bringing new therapies to market without that patent protection. But there's other things besides the safety testing. There's additional development. There's what CDM Optics did, which is to find out which of this laundry list of 20 different applications is going to be the right one by pounding the pavement and talking to all these different industries about their needs. There is investment that might need to be done in educating the market as to why you would need this technology. So all of that is investment that would be more likely to happen if there's a patent in place. For things that get adopted without that patent protection, by the way, the university is perfectly happy and the federal government is happy for investigators to just publish their results and have it be incorporated into every place. That's a great outcome as well. So that brings us to what is a patentable invention. The patent is it's a legal document, and it goes through the Patent and Trademark Office, and you submit it, and then it gets examined by patent attorneys or people who are trained in patents who have a technological background. And they will look at it for whether it is novel and non-obvious and useful. So how do you know if something that you're working on meets those criteria? Useful can actually be one of the hardest ones because of all the reasons we talked about before. But some early indications that something is useful is if you go and you make a presentation and you get a lot of people from industry asking you about it and asking you for copies of your paper, then you might know that it's that might lead you on that it's useful. Some of your colleagues, if you talk to your colleagues in your department about research you're doing, they may say, well, that has some real industry applications you might want to think about. If something is novel, I usually tell investigators that is actually the hardest thing to prove to the patent office. It's got to be an idea that nobody else has had before, anywhere in the world. They search Japanese patents to make sure that nobody had this idea in Japan. They'll go to academic literature, not just the patent literature, and they don't just search the standard journals. It's really, if the idea is written anywhere, in any form, even if it's up on the internet someplace, that means that it can't be, that it wouldn't meet novelty. But that said, when you're doing academic research, you're really working in the area of novelty, where things are a lot more likely to be novel than if you're doing, than if you're working in a corporation. This is cutting edge stuff that we do at the University of Colorado. And if it's something that is accepted by an academic journal as a new idea, that's often a much higher bar than the patent office has for what is novel. Non-obviousness is kind of a, that's so debatable. This means it can't be obvious to someone who has ordinary skill in the art, is what the law says. So somebody who has the level of skill that you have, would they have figured this out without undue experimentation, is what the law says. So if you have just been pounding away at this and have been working for years, that's really undue experimentation. And so if you just make a discovery through all of that sweat, then that is something that it would be not obvious and not easy to get to. Question?
How long does your office typically take? I realize it probably vary quite a bit, but how long does your office usually take to evaluate something and then get as far as like a provisional on it or something like that?
It certainly varies. We have, we ask for, to have a good 2 months if you want us to evaluate it for international protection. I'll get to this later, but if you don't patent it before your public presentation or your publication, then you would immediately lose international patent rights. You would only have U.S. patent rights. So if you wanted us to evaluate it for that, you really should give us 2 months to do that. We do get inventions that come in just a week before the public disclosure. And so what we'll do is we'll say there's really no way to do a good job in protecting something if we get it in that short of a notice. But what we might say is it really important to have international patent protection? Or is the U.S. market so big and so lucrative? And is this technology so early that we expect new inventions to come out of this project in the future that could get international protection? That's the kind of factor we weigh when we're trying to figure that out.
Okay, and is the critical one for the international, the actual publication or submission to the journal for publication?
Most journals have a confidential review process. This is actually, fortunately enough, my next slide. So okay. We'll change the graphic.
Go ahead.
No, I don't have anything in particular to say about that, but other than answering your question. But yes, it is. In fact, I wish I had brought, there's a bulletin on our website on some of the court cases that have been out there that's really splitting hairs about what is and is not a public disclosure. It's pretty amazing. It's not very university friendly, the law, because there's all kinds of information we share here that we share as a matter of course that the courts really think constitutes a public disclosure. So a lot of research groups give talks to each other way before it's submitted for publication. And if these research groups actually put this up on their research group website with a time and a place and say that it's open to the public, even though nobody has ever come to these from the public, that's still a public disclosure because it was accessible to the public. So things like that do constitute a public disclosure. It's pretty surprising to people when they find out what is really a public disclosure. So, but you still have 1 year after the public disclosure to get U.S. patent rights, and for a lot of technologies, that is still extremely valuable. International patents also are expensive, so we will often start out by trying to protect international patent rights by filing a provisional patent before the public disclosure, but then we can't find a commercial partner. There's no commercial progress with the technology for 30 months after that. We start getting into the national phase of the patent prosecution, which can cost in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the university does not have a budget for that at all anyway. So what we will do at that stage is just say, okay, we've been through all that. You know what, we're just going to keep this going in the U.S. anyway, after keeping all of our options open. So that happens pretty often because our technology is set at such an early stage. So another thing about patents, people ask me, who is an inventor on a patent? Because this is another thing that's pretty different than the academic norms for authorship. For authorship, you have everyone who is involved with running the experiments, lending some data perhaps from their work. You have everyone from the PI down to sometimes somebody in an administrative role who just played a very important role in editing. So that's not the case in U.S. patent law. An inventor is somebody who makes a true conceptual contribution. So if you did not have anything to do with designing the experiment, you just ran the experiment and reported the results, and at no time did you make any kind of conceptual contribution to the invention, then you're not an inventor. So it's often a list that's much shorter than the list of authors. Anybody have any questions about that? Sometimes we get asked, okay, well, this company paid for it, so do they get to be an inventor? And they certainly don't get to be an inventor just by providing funds. It's got to be someone who has provided an idea that's part of it.
So maybe the difference is between inventor and having the economic rights you mentioned.
There is a difference, that's right, between who the inventor is and who owns the invention. Although in the U.S., the inventor, there's a process where the inventor needs to sign a formal assignment to their employer. And that is what we do at the University of Colorado as well. The inventors assign to the University of Colorado, and that's one of the documents that gets filed.
So if a research group's doing a project exclusively with funding from some company, what typically happens for intellectual property from that? Who owns it?
The university does own it still, and the typical, there's actually a contract between the company and the university, and our office works with the Office of Contracts and Grants to review the intellectual property language in those contracts. And what we provide for sponsors of research is an option to negotiate an exclusive license on any invention that comes out of the project.
Okay.
So an exclusive license is just as good. It gives you all the rights that you would have as if you owned it. But there is a license agreement with the university, and that does provide royalties back to the university, and it also provides us with the a means for making sure that they are following through with commercial development of the technology. So we hold them to, if we're going to exclusively license the technology, we do hold them to certain standards and requirements. So I'm going to get into our process now. That's the next. This is what happens inside our office, and we even have pictures of our staff in the environment that they work in and live in every day. That's Mary. She's a Diet Coke drinker. You can see she's got a little problem with it. So what do we do once we get an invention disclosure, and how do we approach it? First, we try to figure out, what does your technology do? And of course, we rely on the inventor to explain this for us. It sounds like a straightforward question, but what we're talking about is, what is the unique value of this invention, and the problem that it solves, and why this might matter to the industry and their customers. So if you just really need to have hunches about this. It's not your job to know the answer to this, but we will then, it's our job to go out and validate those hunches to see if that's right, or come up with our own theories about what it might be good for. So for example, if you have a new kind of spectrometer, it has applications in astronomy, chemistry, fiber optics, we might want to understand the unique advantages of that instrument and then say, well, which industry really has a grave need for that particular set of advantages right now? And that's the first direction we want to go. This is Ted Wawerka. He got his PhD in electrical engineering in an optics field, and he's one of our team members. He would have been here today, but he stops working at 2 p.m. every day to go take care of his kid. So he might ask, what are the technical alternatives to your solution? So whenever there's a problem out there to be solved, there's usually some way that people are solving the problem now. And it's really important for us to understand how it's being solved now and think that through. When we get time to license the technology, if we're lucky enough to get that far, our licensees will do the same exact thought exercise and say, well, how else can this be done, and really how much value does this provide? So one of the theories of invention diffusion I'm going to get into is Rogers' 5 factors, and this is the concept of relative advantage. So how much better is this way than the way that it's been done before? It's an important thing to think about. And then how big is this opportunity is kind of the last question that we might ask internally. We might look at the market size, the subset that's really addressed by your technology, and also kind of the timing of the market opportunity, whether it is out there in the future, something to be expected, whether it's something that is opening next month and there's no way we're going to be ready for it. We need to make sure that the technology is at a place in its development where it's going to hit the market opportunity at the right time. So let's see. I'll try to go fast through diffusion of innovation. Diffusion of innovation, the example is the telephone. It's hard to think of something that's more useful of an invention than the telephone. But I was surprised to figure this out, that it took over 100 years before most people had a telephone. It's really amazing to me. And that's something that can kind of illustrate what it takes to get an invention diffused out there, something revolutionary. So Rogers, there's a theory, attributes of innovations and their rate of adoption. in Diffusion of Innovations by Rogers. He has these 5 factors, and one of them we went over was relative advantage. Another one is compatibility, and compatibility is when an innovation is perceived as consistent with existing values and experiences of the potential adopter. So there can be technological compatibility. So is it consistent with established standards that are out there, or would it require a whole new set of standards? And that could cause a problem for diffusing a new innovation. And then there's also kind of feelings about whether it's compatible and perceptions. So this is an example. What the chemical structure you're saying here is vancomycin. Does anybody know what vancomycin is? This is biochem, so I'm not sure if it's a question for this group, but that's right, the myosin, huh? Vancomycin is the last line of defense antibiotic. And so if you have multi-drug resistant infection of some kind, this is kind of the atom bomb that the hospitals are using, and there's a lot of concern out there in the medical community that we do not want bacteria and infections out there that are resistant to this. So we hardly ever want to use it. We just keep it under lock and key until we really need it. So we had an invention that came about that was a way to coat medical devices and surfaces with something that would inhibit the growth of any bacteria. The catch was that it used vancomycin in order to work. Now, it didn't use it in a way that would create drug resistance among the bacterial communities to vancomycin. So it wouldn't have that problem. But just the idea of using vancomycin in this way, in this more common way, was just a non-starter for anybody in the medical business. So that one, we just couldn't get over that compatibility issue. Complexity, the degree to which an innovation is perceived as relatively difficult to understand and use. So you can imagine what it was like to get people to use the internet before there were browsers and before there were search engines. There was a time when very few people used the internet. And once it was simplified like this, that made the diffusion of the innovation so much easier. So you got to think about, when you have an invention, does it fit into all of this, any of these? Or is it better on some of these measures than others? Trialability. If something is really expensive, like your $900 skis, if you can demo the skis, you're a lot more likely to buy them. So one of the things that I work with software groups a lot. So one of the things that's kind of neat about software is you can release it under open source licenses, and that makes it a lot easier for people to try it, and that can really help with diffusion of the new technology. So that's kind of open source is kind of an innovation in technology diffusion that's come about lately that's kind of neat. And then observability, the degree to which the results of an innovation are visible to others. So in essence, this is why we encourage the presentation of scientific results. It's hard for us to even begin marketing an invention until the presentation has been made in the academic forum of choice. So we want people to get out there and be able to see the data and see the benefit in order to know. So next in my stream of information, does anybody have any questions about diffusion of innovation or comments? Startup versus licensing. So people ask, when we see a new technology, how do we know, are we going to go in a licensing direction with this or a startup direction with this? And the reality is that so much depends on the desires of the inventor in that regard, that almost becomes the number one factor as to whether they are able to work well with others and able to attract a team to work with them, take good advice, and launch it as a company. And if they have just the personal drive to do so. It's a very personal decision. And so that's something that our office can't really go in and mandate or dictate. Now then there's kind of some rational attributes, which is what we're going to talk about now, as to what makes it a better idea to have a startup versus a licensing opportunity. And if it's just obviously a licensing opportunity and we think that it'll be dead in the water as a startup, we will try to talk with a faculty member or a student who is bent on a startup and try to have that conversation and encourage them to think hard about it. It's our job to see that the technology finds its best home. So we don't want to see a technology going into a startup that just shouldn't be there. But the University of Colorado does more startups than almost any other university in the country. We're in the top 10 in that regard, up there with the greats. And we have an increasingly entrepreneurial culture in our labs, which is pretty exciting. So we like startups, and we think there's a lot of good reason for them. So we're pretty open to that path. Now, licensing is a good idea if what you have is a technology that's really an add-on technology. There is an invention that we got earlier last year that was something that prepared a sample for when the sample needed to be vaporized in order to be measured by a certain device. And so it really was something that it would literally bolt on to someone's measurement device. And so you don't want to start a company around just an accessory, usually. You usually want to find the company that makes the best or the most of those measurement devices and try to license it to them. And that's what we were able to do. Licensing is very attractive if there's already an organization that has invested in all of the infrastructure that it takes to do the development, the sales and marketing, and everything else. These are expensive capabilities to build, and it's very high risk to build those capabilities all over again when there's a willing partner right there who has all of that. Now, some industries will not in-license very raw and early stage technology, which is what we see here. We often see something that's the very beginning of a glimmer of an idea, and it's going to take a lot to get it to the point where it would be a product. And certain industries are just not interested in taking that risk. So in those cases, it might make sense, even if it's an accessory, to start a small company, to invest in research and bring it along to a point where maybe there's a prototype that you can bring to them, that you can talk to them about. You have a business development person on your team who can really work out what the value is for that company. And that might make sense then to do a startup company. So startup company, the kind of the intangibles, you've got to be willing to pass on the control of your technology. It is your baby, and so you've got to be willing to see that go to a company, and you might not agree with every decision they make. But if you're unwilling to pass control over your technology, that might be another reason to do a startup company, although it's not a great reason in our minds. You want to make sure that funding and management can be attracted to this opportunity. It's a big enough market opportunity, and it could make enough money for all those capitalists out there that they would be attracted to spend their time, often at no pay at first, to try and build this opportunity. And the team is committed and with a long-term perspective because, you know, I think CDM Optics took close to a decade to get to the point where its technology finally hit its perfect market. And so it can take a very long time. The days of the internet, Googles of the world, are over, I think it's safe to say. And so you're looking at a very long time to get to a point where you're getting a paycheck.
What is the support that TTO provides to startups?
The support that TTO provides to startups, I have something here that I brought a few copies of. They're very rare and they waste a lot of paper, so only take one if you're really interested. Starting a startup, successfully managing the dynamics of a new company. There's a lot of funky legal and business issues that you can run into. We put this together with the Entrepreneurial Law Clinic here on campus. It's a really good guide. This is actually just a draft version. We are getting the final glossy version soon. The main resource that CU Technology Transfer Office provides to new startup companies is a group called the Boulder Innovation Center. And they are a nonprofit organization in Boulder that's affiliated with the university. They're really the commercialization partner of the university. And what they do, when there is a group that's interested in starting a company, we explain the technology and the opportunity to them. And they will tap into their network. They have a network of 700 people who are qualified at some level to participate in a new venture, whether CEO on down. And that's through all industries. And so they'll match you up. They'll say, okay, well, who are the optics people within this community? And they'll arrange a meeting with the inventor group and kind of a hand-picked group of these people. And the technology gets presented, and the idea is that out of that group, the management team can form, and we can see if there's any chemistry between the inventors group and the management group to move forward. And this has worked in the past, and we've been able to match some pretty amazing entrepreneurial talent with some pretty amazing technologies. So we think it's a pretty good model. So, you know, we don't have funding. Very few universities have funding for starting new companies. Funding is a really hard thing to get. And so the best we can do is try to attract someone who knows how to get the funding, who knows how to write a business plan, and who's willing to do all that in exchange for equity. And the inventor group just needs to have the perspective that it's not going to be our company. It's going to be a company we start with this group of entrepreneurs. So.
Are you talking about venture capitals when you say that?
Well, no, I'm talking about entrepreneurs who have been able to raise venture capital money.
Okay, so you have like specific connections with individuals?
Yes. Not us, the Boulder Innovation Center does. You know, we know venture capitalists too. They come to us, they say, what's new? They help us evaluate our technologies. We have a very good relationship with venture capital groups. However, it doesn't really work to introduce a technology to a venture capital group. You really need to introduce a technology to an entrepreneur and get the story straight and be able to spoon feed the opportunity to a venture capital group in a way that makes them pretty interested, because you only have one chance to pitch the venture capital group. So that's the better path. You can't just get money for a great idea anymore. You need to have a great idea, and you need to have a really good story and a really good plan for how it's going to become a reality. So it's now 4:45. The rest of the slides are really on what we, kind of the factors we evaluate as far when we're making a patent decision. There's a couple of things that can trip us up, like if the development is at too early a stage, or if we wouldn't be able to enforce a patent on the technology. And then I'll just skip through those. So when does it make sense to submit an invention? There's a couple of, this gets back to the question on how fast we move, but you can submit an invention when you want to establish a timestamp of when the invention occurred. Courts, in the U.S., the person who gets the patent is the first to invent. So it's pretty important to document when you first invented it, and that's why in industry there's practices of having lab notebooks that are bound, that are dated, that are signed and countersigned. And we encourage people to have those practices in their labs here as well. So lab notebooks, we're often going back to the lab notebook if we get into a question of that, of whether in fact we invented it first. But another way to establish a timestamp is to submit it to our office, because we have a database and we track the date it came in, and that's a pretty solid record as well. Or when you have a manuscript or a thesis draft that's almost ready to submit for publication, and as I mentioned, we need 2 months or so to evaluate it for foreign patent protection. So either any time between when you first have the idea and you want to establish a date stamp and the manuscript submission. That's all a fine time to submit it to our office. And then this is the invention submission form. A link to it. Very easy form. We've simplified it so that we make sure we get more inventions. All it calls for is the title and the description and the inventors and the funding source. So that's how we've made it easier for everyone, rather than asking them to think through and tell us what the invention is, what the novel invention is. That's what we used to do. Now we can just work from a manuscript, and then we call you and ask you what the novel invention is. So people prefer that. Any questions? Yeah?
I'm wondering about how many inventions you evaluate in a year, how many go anywhere?
Good question. Last year we got 122 inventions at CU Boulder, and that was up from around 103 the year before. So we had a real spike in inventions. We're still trying to work through all of them. There are 4 of us who handle inventions on the Boulder campus, and so we're going through quite a lot. We have been doing about 21 exclusive licenses and options a year, so that's about 1 in 5, I guess, that end up at the license stage, which is pretty good. We are patenting. We're doing a provisional patent on probably half of the inventions we see, and a provisional patent is kind of a low-cost, early-stage thing, and then we have to move to the regular U.S. patent application, which is more expensive, and we might go to the U.S. patent application for half of those. Those are maybe the ones that get licensed, plus maybe a few more that we just are convinced are going to change the universe. So.
So you talked a little bit about when to consider a startup versus consider a license. So in that case, are you thinking about a startup that you want to turn into a large company, or are you thinking about it as a startup in the I'm going to start up this company and I hopefully get bought out. So.
Well, you know, I actually put startups in two different categories. I put them in growth versus lifestyle. And a growth company is in two different categories, and that's in I'm going to be huge and go public, or I'm going to eventually get bought out. If you've heard about the financial crisis, even before the financial crisis, it's been an increasingly unbelievable story for people to say, I'm going to start a company and it's going to go public. So it's gotten to the point where investors don't even want to hear it because they might think you're crazy. And so it's if that is your plan, that's fine, but you do want to have in your mind also an exit strategy for possible acquisition. Who might want to buy something like this?
From your comment, I'm guessing that's much more common.
Much more common. Yeah. And the lifestyle company, on the other hand, is it's generally things like the hot dog stand on Pearl Street. It's going to be enough to generate income to finance your life so that you're working for yourself, but it's not something that is building growth value. So those are I think that companies that are started and aiming towards acquisition, they're pretty exciting opportunities and take a lot of risk and hard work themselves. So
you said that CU owns the patent. So
Mm-hmm.
what rights do you have as inventors to that patent? Like,
good question.
do you own some of it? Or
Actually, yeah, I can't believe I didn't mention this, but at CU Inventors, the Inventor Group gets 25% of anything that the university gets in terms of royalties, equity, any payments. The inventors get 20. Huh?
Contract, or is that like
That's in policy. That's in policy. CU Regent policy. 25% goes to the lab account of the kind of the PI who led the project. 25% goes to the PI's department, and 25% stays in our office, and that's how we fund our operations. So it's a lot better deal than industry. Yeah. So inventors, inventor lab account, department, and then CU president, which is our office. So.
And what does PI stand for?
Principal investigator. So that would be kind of a faculty advisor. It's got to be somebody who's got a permanent role here at the university, who gets the lab account.
Any more questions? So let's
Okay, thanks.
ready?